Hi everyone, Dr. Ramani here. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on all things narcissism. Today we're going to talk about something that I have gotten many messages about, and it's something I really want to make sure I'm very clear on because I apologize actually for any times I've used language or talked about this in a way where this group of the population didn't feel understood, because that was never my intention. So I'm hoping this will create some clarity there. Today I'm going to be talking about men who experience narcissistic abuse. We often use very gendered language here and assume it's women who experience this, but there's many men who experience narcissistic abuse. So let's break that down. Let's talk about this. And those of you who are men experiencing this, please feel free to drop something in the comments, because I think this has even been an oversight of mine. So I ended up doing some work into this and put this particular video together. So let's talk about this. The baseline assumption is too often that in any relationship, the man is the narcissist and a woman is suffering. So we talk excessively about narcissistic husbands, narcissistic fathers, narcissistic boyfriends, narcissistic adult sons, brothers-in-law, etc. But here's the issue. Let's call this one straight. Enough of you out there have narcissistic mothers that we know that there's plenty of narcissistic women. And that means mothers, wives, girlfriends, sisters, adult daughters, daughters-in-law, women. There are men in relationships with men who are enduring narcissistic relationships. I have heard the frustration of men who often feel that a lot of the content out there, including mine, that is about narcissistic relationships often doesn't capture their experience. And I get that. I understand that, and I hear that. So that's why I want to focus and give some, really give some strength to the conversation about men experiencing narcissistic abuse and who often don't feel heard or reflected in the discourse on these difficult relationships. First of all, narcissism appears in both genders, okay? There is nothing biological about it per se that the research has suggested that would imply that a man is more biologically predisposed to narcissism. I know people have tried to float things about testosterone and stuff, but the science there isn't convincing me of anything. The challenge really becomes culture and society. There are far more cultures out there that are patriarchal, male-dominated, or that have significant restrictions on women, as well as existing privileges that favor men. And all of that cultural, societal stuff, can skew the statistics in favor of men being more likely to be developed as and enabled as narcissists. Men also have a major disadvantage. They are often discouraged from emotional expression or even having experience of feeling supported emotionally as boys. They didn't ask for that, but it's how culture is organized. And into adulthood, we are more supportive of vulnerability and showing emotion in women than we are in men. And when you couple that with childhood emotional development and the way that culture and society interact with boys and men, it is more likely for a man to become narcissistic. But that's not biological. But a substantial proportion of women also have these difficult personality patterns. And for men in gay relationships, again, they're two men, but they're still enduring, a man in a relationship is enduring a narcissistically abusive pattern in their primary relationship with a man. Now, sometimes men may believe that this whole issue of narcissistic abuse isn't their issue. So they may not even feel as vulnerable to it. Again, men are socialized differently than women and may feel more of a sense of what we call agency or efficacy, or they believe in their ability to get things done and may be more supported in that by society. What that means, though, is that men can often be blindsided by narcissistic relationships. I can't tell you how many times I have worked with a confident man who believed he could manage anything that would come his way. And then, one day, he encounters a particularly malignant narcissistic person or partner, and then was just tidal waved and didn't know which way was up. No one should be so confident or arrogant to think that they would be the exception to the rule, that they would be the one who was not negatively impacted by a relationship with somebody with a narcissistic style. Men and women both need information, so if they do encounter a relationship like this, they aren't blindsided, but instead they're prepared and can either set up boundaries or get out before they get in too deep. Then, when it does happen, the narcissistic abuse does happen to a man, they often feel that they don't know where to turn to cope with this big, confusing, mind mess that is one of these relationships. The lack of recognition of narcissistic abuse in men means that there are many men out there who are experiencing narcissistic abuse and that may feel gaslighted by a system that does not believe that they could be, as men, encountering the negative effects of a toxic relationship. There may be the belief that, due to assumptions we have about gender roles, that a man would automatically be able to command a stronger role within a relationship, whether that's in a mother-son relationship, a husband-wife relationship, a husband-husband relationship, that one man is going to have the stronger role, or a man is going to have a stronger role. Manipulation is manipulation, and the manipulator has more power, even if to the world it looks like they don't. As a result, many men may be reluctant to seek out help for these patterns, and when they do, they may not feel heard. And to the therapists out there who may be watching this, it is our responsibility as therapists to receive everyone's story with as objective an ear as possible. And if we hear these patterns from a man who's telling us, to not minimize them just because the story is coming from a male client. This is actually an issue that has arisen in the domestic violence community for years. Men can be and are the victims of domestic violence. Interesting data that was shared by the Centers for Disease Control suggests that in the United States, 1 in 10 men have experienced sexual or physical violence or stalking by an intimate partner. And men are also much less likely to seek help. They're less likely to find resources that are specifically targeted at men, and they're also not comfortable sharing with law enforcement or other advocates that they have been abused within an intimate relationship. Now, yes, I know the numbers are higher for women, but they are happening for men. I have worked with male survivors of domestic violence and abuse, and many of them felt that there was little recourse for them, and they would stay in relationships for exactly the same reasons that women would stay in abusive relationships. The justifications and the dissonance were the same. There's also the issue of divorce. And as is more clear at this point, a divorce, as you should know, is that a divorce from a narcissist is not for the faint of heart. It is combative, expensive, abusive, and soul-sapping, and also heartbreaking if children are involved. Many men who have gone through divorces from a narcissistic spouse have said that they ran into exactly the same struggles as women did when they were divorcing their own narcissistic spouses. They ran into the uninformed court systems, lawyers that never seemed to get it, fear for their children's well-being, and an estranged partner who views winning as the only outcome. Many of the resources out there tilt towards women when it comes to narcissistic abuse, and even the language of programs out there can seem as though they're not designed to support men. It's something I'm aware of, and it's something it's a wake-up call for me to really attempt to double down on doing that better. Here's where, though, the whole thing got murky. For years, the high-conflict, antagonistic, narcissistic men out there who had for years been able to strong-arm court systems, and in many ways still are, they started facing shifts. And sometimes the narcissism in these men was being seen and acknowledged. Then, sadly, some of these difficult, antagonistic, narcissistic men organized into groups that weaponized the language of high conflict and difficult personalities to their advantage, and then narcissistic men were portraying their former partners, usually women, as high conflict, antagonistic, and manipulative. this continues to remain a problem in the court system and is probably one of the major drivers of why the court systems are so resistant to not acknowledging these personality patterns and being very committed to only sticking to the clear, documented evidence that is admissible in family court cases. So courts are unwilling to have a conversation about personality. This entire mess has actually also hurt men who are actually and honestly in narcissistic and high conflict relationships. Not the men who are making it up, but the men who actually are. And now these men may be attempting to secure the best possible situation for their children in a parenting arrangement. Men in narcissistic relationships, you're going to hit the same wall as women in narcissistic relationships in the courts. Men are likely to gaslight themselves if they are in a relationship of any kind with someone who is narcissistic. Men will say things like, "Ugh, I am letting this get to me. What is wrong with me? I need to toughen up. I need to stop taking everything so personally." Men can do this just as easily as women, and men will often then not be able to objectively recognize the pattern as unhealthy and then not set boundaries. Our sad societal tendency to expect men to toughen up and buck up does them no favors and can leave them in narcissistic relationships far longer than is healthy. Men may have also experienced the challenges of having a narcissistic father more acutely. A narcissistic father may have already written off his daughters, but the son may be expected to be a conduit for a narcissistic father's expectations, aspirations, and disappointments. A son may have to endure the criticism of a father, their unrealistic expectations, the humiliation, and the invalidation. And a man may look back at a lifetime of trying to please an unpleasable father and carry the heavy burden of being not enough into adulthood, which can result in making poor choices in terms of whom they choose as a life partner, underselling themselves in their own careers or education, and generally feeling as though they have let the world down. Having a narcissistic father can place a man at greater risk of anxiety, negative mood states, including things like irritability, or even just being more dysregulated with your emotions. Narcissistic fathers often may maintain what we call high expectations with low investment, magically thinking that they can snap their fingers and get a son to hop to it for them and perform for them in any way they want, but they never actually nurture their sons. And no, narcissistic mothers are no easier, and many men will note that a difficult and fraught relationship with a narcissistic mother set the tone for a lifetime of difficult relationships, of choosing women who were unpleasable and demanding, and playing out the hellish, repetitive carousel in their life in perpetuity. Now, gay men are in relationships with men, right? So if they are experiencing narcissistic abuse and an intimate relationship, it is de facto then it's with a male partner. Again, I have to tell you, not enough is being written about or even frankly known about narcissistic or high conflict relationship abuse within same-sex partnerships, as more work needs to be done there. And the mental health profession still needs better training and awareness of relational issues that arise in same-sex partnerships, and not just assume that everything is going to be the same, that we can apply the same premises that we observe in heterosexual relationships that exist in a very different cultural space in our world. There are many, many men in same-sex relationships who endure lots of narcissistic abuse. I've worked with many clients in this situation, and they often find that few therapists understand this pattern, and then the man experiencing the narcissistic abuse may fall into patterns of self-doubt about even labeling it this way, or may even justify their partner's behavior under the same rationalizations we see across all narcissistic relationships, especially narcissistic relationships that happen in more marginalized communities like racial and ethnic minorities. People run the risk of justifying behavior on the basis of how biased and discriminatory the world is and how difficult a person's life is. I'm sorry, but abuse is abuse. And while I acknowledge that the bias and discrimination of the world does not bring out the best in anyone, you as a partner are not responsible for that. And a healthy person, if you had a non-narcissistic person, would draw close to someone who is their partner and be their ally and not consistently lash out at their partner for the injustices of the world. Again, to the therapists out there, it is critical that you simply hear about your client's relationship patterns with an open ear and that we never make assumptions. This is essential if we want clients, men and women, to come in and feel safe talking about their difficult relationships, regardless of gender. Then, of course, there are the workplace issues. What gets interesting is if a man is sort of going through his life relatively insulated from these kinds of narcissistic personalities, doesn't have it in his family or anything, but then faces these issues of narcissism down for the first place in the workplace. In the first place in the workplace. There could be a real temptation to soft pedal on these issues. It's just the old boys club. I get it. It's just guys being guys, or his bark is worse than his bite. I got this. He's just testing me. There are often assumptions in many industries that a hazing ritual is just part and parcel of getting into the job and advancing in the job. And we see these hazing rituals as a part of law, medicine, finance, academia, athletics, media. And these built-in hazing rituals means that these cultures get handed down. There is a danger of men enabling these cultures, putting up with the toxic behavior as a means of getting ahead. But there is also a toll that these cultures carry, and many men have reported significant mental and physical health breakdowns from working in these toxic environments. Again, men may be less likely to step up, say something, and advocate for change because, again, they may not want to be perceived as weak, and that's unfortunate. Because men are often in a more empowered position to make those changes. Women in these environments often do not stand a chance. And despite recent shifts we've seen in society, women are actually less likely to get hurt in a workplace. Many men agree that these narcissistic workplace cultures are toxic and are harmed by them. And frankly, here's a word of guidance, joining forces with women and fighting the good fight against these toxic cultures, men and women together, could also be healing. And so much of this, these issues that we face with men and narcissistic abuse are about emotion and vulnerability. We have failed so many men by pathologizing emotion and pathologizing feeling and vulnerability in them. That ability to express and be okay with one's inner world and their own vulnerabilities is actually the ultimate narcissism antidote within the self. In addition, the shaming of men who are willing to share that they are being harmed in toxic relationships, that can take a much greater toll on men who are struggling with this. They are often told, again, they need to be tougher or stronger or deal with it, which is in essence that we're gaslighting these men. We're gaslighting a man who is enduring this kind of toxic relational situation. I do hope that more and more men are able to give themselves permission to seek out therapy, support groups, and talk this out. It does happen to the best of us, and getting this out into the light is so important for men and for women. Regardless of gender, all people enduring high conflict, antagonistic, difficult, narcissistic relationships need safe spaces to talk it out, learn their vulnerabilities, to be educated about the patterns, and be given the tools to cope and make the best possible decisions. Even if there are likely to be more narcissistic, difficult, toxic, and high conflict men than women in our world, and there are, as it stands, that those are where the numbers are, that doesn't mean that men are not negatively impacted by these patterns. They are. Therapists, lawyers, advocates, human resource personnel, anyone who is in the role of supporting people navigating these relationships have to ensure that they are aware of these complex dynamics and the fact that nobody is immune. And we have to be open to hearing men's stories of abuse, as men's stories are often minimized, and we also need to create safe spaces for men to share their experiences. Difficult, toxic people are equal opportunity offenders. They do tend to go after the most vulnerable, but ultimately they will use, abuse, invalidate, gaslight, and discard anyone as needed. So like I said, I no one on this planet, by gender, by race, by age, by anything, is immune to this. Anyone can be narcissistically abused, and no one's protected. So it's important that everyone does feel heard, so they have the tools they need to set the boundaries. The world is not going to stop the narcissist. This is something we have to do on our own. Thanks again.